This is the order of operation worksheet. The first problem is an exponential. It is 2 to the 4th power, where the base here is a positive 2, and the power here is a 4. Exponentials are repeat multiplication. I repeat the base 4 times, and the operation is multiplication. That is, I got 4 copies of the number 2, and I multiply. Since all of the operations are multiplication, we have to work left to right. 2 times 2 is 4. Now 4 times 2 is 8. And 8 times 2 is 16. Our final answer is 16. Number 3 is another exponential. Only this time, the base is negative. We emphasize that the base is negative by placing the negative 4 in a parentheses. Now the power here, or the exponent, is 2. So I have 2 copies of the 4. And I multiply. And so a negative times a negative is a positive 16. Number 5. I have 3 to the 4th power. My base here is a positive 3. My exponent is a 4. So I write down my base of 3 4 times, and I repeat multiply. 3 times 3 is 9. 9 times 3, 27. 27 times 3? Well, let's think about this. We're going to have to bring out our multiplication algorithm. 7 times 3 is 21. 3 times 2 is 6. Plus 2 is 8. Final answer is 81. Number 7 is a negative 7 to the 3rd power, where my base now is negative. It is negative 7. We emphasize this by putting it in parentheses. The exponent, or power, is a 3. That means I have 3 negative 7s, and I multiply. I repeat multiply. Negative 7 times negative 7 is positive 49. I'm going to have to multiply my positive 49 by a negative 7. My answer is going to be negative, because a positive times a negative is a negative. But I'm going to have to do some scratch work to deduce the answer of 49 times 7. 9 times 7 is 63. 4 times 7 is 28, plus 6 is 34. My final answer is negative 343. Number 9. We have 34 minus 7 times 6 plus 8. Order of operation says I multiply before I add or subtract. So I'm going to take the 7 times the 6, and I'm going to get my 42. Don't forget, I have 34 minus and a plus 8. Please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. Multiplication, right here, outranks my addition and subtraction. This is why I multiplied. Now, because subtraction and addition has the same rank, we work left to right. Meaning 34 minus 42 must be computed first, and 34 minus 42 is negative 8. Bring down the addition of 8. Now negative 8 plus 8 is 0. Number 11. Negative 15 minus 2 in parentheses. This is times negative 20 minus 7. Please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. Your parentheses has the highest priority, or the highest order, the highest rank. But we have to do what's inside the parentheses. Now, since we have two parentheses, we work again left to right because these have the same priority. Negative 15 minus 2 is negative 17. I emphasize this number is negative by putting it in parentheses. Times negative 20 minus 7 is negative 27. I now have to remember that a negative times a negative is a positive. So my final answer is going to be positive. I won't notate a sign. But I'm going to have to do some work. I'm going to have to multiply 27 with 17. 7 times 7 is 49. 7 times 2 is 14. Plus 4, we get 18. 1 times 7 is 7. And 1 times 2 is 2. I'm now going to add, and I get 9, 15, and 4. My final answer is 459. Number 13. 6 times negative 3 plus 7 times negative 2 plus 5. We have two sets of parentheses. We have an innermost parentheses here, in here, and we have an outermost parentheses here and here in the form of a square bracket. We work inside out, meaning do the innermost parentheses first. Compute negative 2 plus 5. Notice, negative 2 plus 5 is a positive 3. There's no operation between the 7 and the parentheses. It's understood by default to be multiplication. We now use order of operation to compute what's inside the bracket. I have addition, and I have multiplication. Multiplication outranks addition by please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. So 7 times 3 gives me 21. I'm now able to add, finally, negative 3 with 21. Negative 3 plus 21 is a positive 18. I don't have to emphasize my number is positive by putting it in a bracket or parentheses. I could just use my dot to indicate that I have to multiply. Now I have to determine what 6 times 18 is. Let's bring out our multiplication algorithm. 6 times 8 is 48. 6 times 1 is 6, plus 4 is 10. Final answer is 108. Number 15. 20 plus negative 9 times negative 15 plus a negative 2. Let's take a closer look at the operations. Between these two parentheses is multiplication. So, multiplication here outranks my addition. Please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. I'm going to have to multiply negative 9 times negative 14. A negative times a negative is a positive. But let's consider what 9 times 15 is. 9 times 5 is 45. 9 times 1 is 9, plus 4 is 13. This becomes 20 plus 135 plus a negative 2. Addition and addition have the same rank. We work left to right. 120 plus 135 is 155. 155 plus a negative 2 is 153. Number 17. 6 minus 5 in parentheses to the second power. Please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. Parentheses outranks the exponential. We must do what's inside the parentheses, and 6 minus 5 is 1. This exponential is 1 to the second power. The base is positive 1, and the exponent is 2. That means I have two bases here of the number 1, and I multiply. 1 times 1 is 1. Number 19. 3 times 4 plus 5 to the second power minus 4 times 6 minus 3 squared. My parentheses outranks my exponentials. Please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. But I must do what's inside the parentheses. 4 plus 5 is 9. 3 times 9 to the second power minus 4 times 6 minus 3 is 3. 3 to the second power. Multiplication, multiplication. I have a subtraction. However, I also have exponentials. Exponentials outrank the multiplication and the subtraction. So 9 squared is 81. 3 times, subtract 4. 3 squared is 9. Notice I did the left exponential before the right. My operations now again are subtraction, multiplication, and multiplication. Multiplication outranks subtraction. Please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. 3 times 81 is 243. 4 times 9 is 36. I have to subtract. Using my subtraction algorithm, 3 minus 6 can't be done. I have to borrow. Let's use our subtraction algorithm. 3 minus 6 can't be done. We have to borrow. 32 minus 6 is 7. 3 minus 3 is 0. 2 minus 0 is 2. Final answer is 207. Number 21. 3 minus 4 in parentheses to the fourth power. Parentheses outranks my exponential. I'm going to have to subtract because that's what's inside my parentheses. And 3 minus 4 is negative 1 to the fourth power. My base is negative. We emphasize that negative base of negative 1 by using a parentheses. So I have 4 negative 1's, and we repeat multiplication. Since it's the same priority, we work left to right. Negative 1 times negative 1 is positive 1. Positive 1 times negative 1 is negative 1. And negative 1 times negative 1 is positive 1. Number 23. 3 times 5 plus 3 to the second power minus 2 times 5 minus 3 to the second power. My parentheses, that is, what's inside, outranks my exponential. Please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. 5 plus 3 will give me an 8. That's to the second power, times 3. 5 minus 3 will give me a 2, and that's to the second power. We now have 2 exponentials we must have to evaluate, here and here. The exponentials outrank my subtraction. 8 squared, 64. 2 squared is 4. I now have 2 multiplication problems to do. I have 2 multiplication operations, and I have a subtraction operation. 3 times 64 is on the left. 2 times 4 is on the right. 3 times 64, if we do our algorithm, we get 12, 18, we get 19. 192 minus 2 times 4 is 8. 192 minus 8. 192 minus 8. By our subtraction algorithm, we're going to have to borrow. My answer is 184. 25. We have some absolute values. In order to compute an absolute value or determine an absolute value, we have to have a number inside the absolute value. We have to have a single number. Absolute values are not parentheses, but we have to determine the value that's inside before we can perform an absolute value. Negative 8 minus 5 is negative 13. That's what's inside this absolute value. I am now free to determine the absolute values. But let's take a closer look. This number and this number have to be determined. I have -1 times, well, the absolute value of -7 is a +7, minus the absolute value of a -13 is a +13. I want to emphasize that this negative sign is here. The subtraction is here. All we did was determine the absolute values. Now, order of operations says I have to multiply before I subtract. I perform this operation before I subtract because multiplication outranks subtraction. -1 times +7 is -7. -13, we can think of this as subtraction as addition of a negative. I'm now adding two negative numbers. I'm adding two bills. -7 plus -13 is -20. Number 27. Again, I have an absolute value. I can only determine the absolute value of a number. So I have to do what's inside my absolute value. 2 plus 4 is 6. This is the absolute value of 6 times 7 to the second power plus my 5. The absolute value of 6 is +6. I now have three operations. I have addition, I have multiplication, and I have an exponential. Please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. The exponential outranks multiplication and addition. Seven squared is 49. I'm going to have to multiply before I add. So I have to determine what 49 times 6 is. 6 times 9 is 54. 6 times 4 is 24 plus 5 is 29. This is 294 plus 5 for a final answer of 299. 29. I have two sets of absolute value. The second absolute value is not a number. I'm going to have to evaluate this because I can only take the absolute value of a number. -24 minus 18 is -42. I now have two absolute values to determine. The absolute value of -9 and the absolute value of a -42. The -1 sign is already here. So the absolute value of a -9 is a +9 my subtraction sign is here, and the absolute value of a negative 42 is a positive 42. This negative sign is still here. That subtraction is still here. The multiplication now has to be performed because multiplication outranks subtraction by order of operation. Negative 1 times positive 9 is negative 9 minus 42. I can think of this as negative 9 plus a negative 42. I'm adding two bills. So if I owe $9 and I owe another $42, I'm going to owe $51. $31. I have an absolute value, but it's not of a single number. I have to perform what's inside. 5 plus 4 is 9. I can now determine the absolute value of 9, which is 9. I have multiplication, subtraction, and an exponential. The exponential outranks multiplication and subtraction. 7 squared is 49. I have my subtraction, I have my multiplication. Multiplication outranks subtraction. I have to determine what 49 times 9 is. 9 times 9 is 81. 9 times 4 is 36, plus 8 is 44. This is 441 minus 2 for an answer of 339. Excuse me, that's incorrect. That is 439.